Police officers make fun of Black woman, but when NASA reveals her true identity, the court erupts. It started out as a routine afternoon traffic stop on a peaceful street that ought to have concluded with a wave goodbye and a quick chat. Rather, it descended into a nightmare of mockery, unfounded allegations, and overt bigotry. It never occurred to the officers who stopped a calm, collected Black woman that their smirks would give way to looks of utter disbelief. They didn't know who they were up against. A horde of NASA representatives appeared on their victim's behalf as she eventually made it into the courtroom, ready to share the shocking revelation. What followed would rock the city and send shockwaves around the country. With her heart thumping against her ribs, Aaliyah Monroe clutched the steering wheel of her sleek silver Honda Civic. She had spent the afternoon looking through rare books on astrophysics, her lifelong love, and, little known to most, her real job at a little bookstore in downtown Morganville. As she made her way along the twisting back roads to her small apartment on the outskirts of town, the musty smell of ancient books still clung to her jacket. Orange and pink streaks painted the sky as the late summer sun sank below the horizon. Every time she saw a police car, she couldn't get rid of the uneasiness that came over her. Unfortunately, this was the situation for a large number of Morganville's Black residents. She had become accustomed to nervous looks directed at her, the reflexive anxiety that accompanied uniformed authority, despite her respected work and composed manner. When she saw the flashing red and blue lights reflected in her rearview mirror that night, her uneasiness transformed into a vivid, heart-stopping panic. She instinctively parked her car on the side of the empty road. One police cruiser rolled to a stop behind her, and her heart pounded. She looked at her speedometer again. Without a doubt, she wasn't speeding. She was also aware that her insurance and registration were up to date. This abrupt halt had no justifiable cause. Aaliyah put both hands on the wheel and lowered her window with mechanical precision, the ubiquitous symbol of collaboration. She took a deep, tremulous breath. Two officers exited the police cruiser as the door slid open. Their shapes appeared ominous against the whirl of vibrant lights. Aaliyah's throat dried up as they got closer. One cop said, "Good evening, ma'am." He looked to be in his late 30s, tall and broad-shouldered. Officer Derek Lowe was the name on the metal badge on his chest. His inquisitive gaze wandered over Aaliyah and the inside of her vehicle. "Please provide your license and registration." "Of course," she said quietly as she took her papers out of a well-organized glove box folder. Her fingers shook a little as she gave them over, but she made an effort to keep her cool. Through the passenger window, the second officer, a younger man with the name Officer Mark Rollins printed on his uniform, looked in. His expression was one of both interest and contempt. He muttered loudly enough for Aaliyah to hear, driving in a somewhat upscale manner for this neighborhood. A shiver of rage sparked inside her, but she repressed it. After looking over her paperwork and scowling, Officer Lowe said, "Miss Monroe, do you know why we stopped you?" Aaliyah took a swallow. "Officer, I'm afraid I don't. Did I drive too fast?" He gave a head shake. "You have a taillight out, ma'am." Although he spoke in a firm tone, there was a hint of something more in the sparkle in his eyes. "We received a call regarding what seemed to be a stolen car." Aaliyah tightened her jaw. "Taken? I can tell you this is my car, officer. On the registration, my name appears." Officer Rollins, scoffing lightly. "You don't need to defend yourself, listen. All we're doing is our job." The whole thing seemed unreal. Despite the adrenaline pumping through her veins, Aaliyah tried to sound cool by speaking steadily. "I get it, officer, but maybe there's a miscommunication." Examining Aaliyah's face suspiciously, Officer Lowe looked from the registration documents back to her, then to her license photo, and back again. He cocked his head. "Please get out of the car, Miss Monroe." Her heartbeat quickened. "Do I have to get out of my car for any reason?" Her throat constricted. She was aware of her legal rights, but if she protested too vehemently right now, things would get out of hand. Officer Lowe said, "Ma'am," his hand lingering close to his holster. "Get out of the vehicle." Aaliyah cautiously unbuckled her seatbelt, opened her door, and got up, unsure whether to protest or provoke the officers. The warm air of the summer evening suddenly felt abrasive against her skin. After directing her to the cruiser's hood, the cops requested permission to quickly check her car. She was incensed over the breach of her privacy, but she consented in the hopes that it would speed up the meeting. A few hardcover textbooks on advanced orbital mechanics, star charts, and her own notepad full of intricate calculations were discovered by the officers as they searched her trunk and rear seat. Rollins, the officer, snorted. "What's all of this? A code of some sort?" Aaliyah swallowed her outrage and responded curtly, "That's academic work." Officer Rollins and Officer Lowe smirked at each other. They didn't seem convinced. Aaliyah became aware that they had already decided on her at that point. She was just another suspect in their eyes. Someone who had no place in a good car. Someone who more closely matched their preconceptions than the realities they were presented with. Her thoughts were racing. She had always thought law enforcement was decent. She had been raised to respect uniformed people. But she felt helpless as these two officers looked at her doubtfully and mockingly. Unaware of the strange turn this one traffic stop would eventually take, she secretly hoped it would conclude without any problems. She had no idea that this was only the beginning. The Morganville police station's small interior was a patchwork of fluorescent lighting, beige cinderblock walls, and agitated voices. Aaliyah sat rigidly on a wooden bench close to the front desk, her body taut and trembling, but her wrists unbound. Although she had not been legally detained, the cops had demanded that she come to the station so they could question her more. She was trying to understand how a simple taillight issue and a suspicious stolen car report had turned into this embarrassing situation. Holding herself erect made her shoulders hurt. She observed Officer Rollins and Officer Lowe conversing with another officer on the other side of the room. They would occasionally look into her snicker. In her chest, anxiety grew like wildfire. She heard a few tidbits of their chat, none of which were complimentary. A tall, slender officer with deep-set eyes once walked by her. After a few moments of staring at her, he let out a bark into the air. She's most likely a hustler. Aaliyah felt an intense surge of humiliation and rage that she was unable to control after hearing the remark. Officer Lowe eventually walked over with his arms folded. "Miss Monroe," he continued, his pleasant exterior barely concealing a hint of contempt. "We just need to verify a few things. You claim ownership of this vehicle, right?" Aaliyah took a breath. "Yes, I did buy it 2 years ago, as I mentioned. Every document is in its proper place." He chuckled briefly and mockingly. "Yes, of course." Subsequently, he gestured for her to accompany him into a tiny interrogation chamber. As she entered the cubicle without a window, she complied and stole herself. It was as if the walls were closing in. The coolness seeped into her palms as she laid them on the metal tabletop. Opposite her, Officer Lowe sat down and placed her license, registration, and other documents before him. With his arms folded and a little smile on his lips, Officer Rollins leaned against the doorframe. Lova started by tapping a pen on the table. "Although your license and registration do support what you're stating, it's strange that we were tipped off about this car being stolen." As if anticipating that Aaliyah would confess to some secret wrongdoing, he narrowed his eyes at her. She scowled. "Can I go if the paperwork proves the car is mine?" "I can't think of anything more to say." Rollins managed to push himself away from the doorframe. "What do you do for a living, Ms. Monroe?" In a suspicious tone, he asked. "These strange math books and star maps. Do you work as a teacher?" She had a constricted throat. She was quite pleased of her work, but she was afraid to show it in this setting. She responded softly, "I'm a research scientist," not wanting to go into any detail unless asked. "My area of expertise is astrophysics." The two officers looked at each other with amusement, and there was a moment of stillness. Then the sound of their half-suppressed laughter reverberated off the bare walls. "Astrophysics?" yelled Rollins. "That's a new one, wow. It must be a big shot." Aaliyah got a burn on her cheeks. The mockery in the air was almost palpable to her. "Is there a humorous aspect to that?" Lowe gave a disbelieving shake of his head. "So let me clarify this. You reside in a low-key area of town. The vehicle you drive has been reported stolen, and you say you're some genius from NASA. Doesn't that sound suspicious?" Aaliyah's voice remained steady despite her erupting rage. "In Greenbelt, Maryland, I'm employed at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. There's no secret about it. My co-workers can confirm it. If you would like verification, you may just call." She scrambled for some contacts on her phone. Rollins laughed sarcastically. Of course, we'll investigate that. But we have a few more checks to make for the time being. Perhaps you're telling the truth. Or perhaps this is your huge cover story." He shrugged, as if it were impossible to imagine a black woman working as an astrophysicist. "Well, if I'm not being arrested, I'm free to leave." Anger and fear mixed together to make Aaliyah's voice shake. The officers looked at each other. Lowe cleared his throat. "For now, you are free to leave. Later on, we may need to ask more questions." Aaliyah packed up her things and walked out of the interrogation room without saying anything else. Ignoring the odd looks, she strode out into the reception area. Despite the fact that her legs felt like jelly, she made herself appear composed and determined. The night air outside was like being released from prison. Breathing deeply, she reminded herself that she had done nothing wrong and that their disdain was based on ignorance. Gazing at the relics of the day's altercation whirling around in her brain, Aaliyah concluded that one thing was definite. She would not back down, no matter what the days ahead brought. She had no idea that the sequence of events would soon bring her to a courtroom that would rock Morganville and beyond. The skies were still shrouded in a hazy pre-dawn blue when Aaliyah woke up the next morning. Her mind had been replaying the police station disaster, and she had been sleeping fitfully, tossing and turning. She conducted a crucial video call with her team at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, despite her mental fatigue. She had been intrigued about the project since the Mars Perseverance rover's successful landing because it involved analyzing data from the spacecraft. She had a modest but comfortable home office with bookcases full of books on advanced mathematics, computer modeling, and astrophysics. Her degrees, including a PhD in astrophysics from MIT, a bachelor's degree in physics from Howard University, and numerous certificates of accomplishment, were arranged neatly on the wall. She spent some time staring at those frames, recalling the years of tears and sweat that had led her to this point. Her co-workers' familiar faces appeared on the screen as she logged into the virtual meeting. Dr. Robert Chong of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, Dr. Maribel Lopez of NASA Goddard, and a few other outstanding scientists from various time zones. The sight of them gave a brief feeling of relief. Her expertise and intelligence were valued in this field. "Good morning," Dr. Lopez said to Aaliyah. "You appear worn out. Are you all right?" Aaliyah forced a grin. "A difficult night, but I'll be all right. Let's begin." She jumped right into the updates, talking about the data abnormalities found in the composition of the planet's regolith and the rover's most recent mineral analysis results. She forgot the humiliations of the night before and lost herself for a few precious hours in the world of cosmic inquiry. However, the break was short. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unidentified number as soon as she hung up. "We have more inquiries concerning your vehicle. Anticipate a summons." "MPD." Aaliyah scowled. A call? And over a car that was hers? Anger and worry mixed in the pit of her stomach. She recalled the contemptuous snickers and the feeling that they were out to get her for anything. Sinking into her chair, she thought about what she would do next. Adversity was nothing new to her. She has encountered skepticism in almost every stage of her schooling and professional life as a black female astronomer. This felt different, though. More intimate, darker. She could tell by the officer's manner that they might not be able to drop this case so quickly. She went out to run errands that afternoon, her eyes continuously darting to the rearview mirror as she prepared for another squad car. Her heart pounded whenever she saw red or blue, even on a fleeting commercial. The psychological effects of what had happened the night before were immediately apparent. Previously, she drove these streets with comfort, but these days, paranoia permeates every decision she makes. Aaliyah heard two middle-aged women conversing near the produce section of a neighborhood grocery after she had finished shopping. They whispered about a black woman who was allegedly being investigated for auto theft. One of them even laughed incredulously as she said, "She claims to be a rocket scientist." Aaliyah stiffened. Already, the rumor mill was churning, and it was working against her. She saw a handful of bystanders close to the entrance as she was leaving. One of them made a casual comment to his friends while sporting a hoodie bearing the local high school logo. "Yes, I have heard that she will soon be busted by the police." As Aaliyah packed her goods into her trunk, they gazed at her. It was nearly oppressive to feel the weight of their critical gaze. Determined to locate a lawyer capable of handling what was quickly turning into a twisted disaster, she went back home. Having had a clean life up until this point, she had no experience in legal matters, but she realized she couldn't handle this on her own. She found Henderson and Branch, LLP, a local law practice specializing in civil rights litigation, via a cursory laptop search. With a focus on defending those who experience prejudice, the business had a solid track record. Following several phone conversations, she was able to schedule a meeting with lawyer Grace Henderson, who had become well known for her tenacious defense in racial profiling cases, for the following day. Aaliyah's growing anxiety subsided just by listening to Henderson's assured voice over the phone. Aaliyah's thoughts kept returning to NASA that night as she tried to relax with a mug of chamomile tea. A flood of contradictory feelings swept over her. Next month, she hoped to complete a significant scientific paper that would revolutionize the study of exoplanet atmospheres. Yet, because of a tip that smacked of malice, she found herself embroiled in a potential court dispute over something as ridiculous as the legitimate ownership of her own car. The same cosmic tapestry that had encouraged her to dream beyond her surroundings as a youngster was visible to her when she gazed out the window at the sky. She felt little and singled out. She let the resentment to rise for a moment. Why should her qualifications, accomplishments, and integrity be questioned just because some people find it hard to believe that a black woman could work as a NASA astrophysicist? She told herself that the truth was on her side as the night became darker. She had the facts on her side. She wouldn't cower if they attempted to haul her into court. She had evidence, statistics, and admirers. Ironically, she would now pursue justice with the same tenacity that had driven her academic endeavors. She had no idea that forces were already at work. She was unaware of how powerful the cops were, and Morganville's rumor mill was a terrible machine that, once it got going, never seemed to stop. However, Aaliyah discovered a silent resolve in the silence of her living room. She refused to allow them to ruin all of the hard work she had put in. Unaware that the admissions would be even more explosive in the courtroom than she could have ever dreamed, she was prepared to defend herself. Aaliyah came to Henderson and Branch, LLP, on a hot afternoon as the mid-July heat pounded Morganville's peaceful downtown. She was determined to exude confidence and elegance, so she dressed in her finest work attire despite the intense heat. She walked toward a grand, refurbished Victorian home with a big wooden sign that said Henderson and Branch, LLP, in letters of polished brass. Thanks to an effective air conditioning system, the room was pleasantly cool. Dark hardwood floors, an exquisite bouquet of fresh white lilies on top of the receptionist's desk, and an elaborate chandelier were all features of the entryway. Aaliyah sat down on a soft couch and waited tensely till a tall, calm woman in her 40s appeared. She exuded a composed authority and wore a navy blue blazer. "Monroe, miss?" The woman's voice was measured and silky as she requested. "My name is Grace Henderson. Come in, please." Aaliyah trailed behind the lawyer along a small corridor lined with framed newspaper clippings, which serve as proof of the firm's prior successes in high-profile cases. She saw headlines like Henderson wins historic discrimination case and Morganville police found liable in racial profiling lawsuit. The knowledge that she was in good hands gave her a little more confidence. She was led by Grace into a private office that had a big window facing out into a well-kept garden. The walls were adorned with dark wooden shelves that held hefty legal books as well as, presumably, private photographs of Grace with her family. The lawyer gestured for Aaliyah to take a seat next to a desk made of polished mahogany on a leather chair. With her hands clasped together, she sat down opposite her. Grace started, giving Aaliyah a contemplative look. "Your email was read by me. Give me the whole tale, starting at the beginning. Even if a detail seems unimportant, don't omit it." She heard everything from Aaliyah. Her history, her position at NASA, the embarrassing traffic stop, the derisive questioning, the dubious text message, and the gossip circulating in the community. Grace took thorough notes and occasionally sought clarification. Aaliyah finally stopped after almost an hour, exhausted but also pleased to have her tale heard without passing judgment. Grace put her pen down. "You gave the names of the officers. Mark Rollins and Derek Lowe, right? Aaliyah gave a nod. They have appeared in cases previously, Grace scowled. Though most people don't take action or are unable to provide evidence of misconduct, I have heard reports of them stereotyping black drivers. Aaliyah became agitated. You think they're after me then? That this is not just a miscommunication? Grace let out a sigh. The pattern is alarming, but I can't say for sure yet. Although infamously difficult to prove, racial profiling is not impossible. We'll need to collect their official report, dashcam footage, and body cam footage. We'll need to see this alleged tip they got concerning the theft of your car. It could be unfounded or fake. The topic of strategy came up. Grace clarified that if the police pursued bogus allegations, Aaliyah had the right to defend herself or even launch a countersuit since they had threatened to file a case against her, no matter how ludicrous. How about NASA? With her fingers tinting, Grace asked, would they be able to verify your status and position if necessary? Normally, NASA's HR or legal divisions prefer to stay out of personal affairs. But if things go out of hand, we may want a formal statement verifying your involvement. Aaliyah gave a nod. NASA would undoubtedly verify my employment, particularly if it were questioned whether I was lying about my identity. Hearing what's going on would infuriate my Goddard co-workers and managers. Good, Grace said. Right now, we'll keep that in our back pocket. I propose that we wait to see if or when charges are really filed. I'll collect preliminary data in the meanwhile. You got that strange SMS message. That kind of message is not usually sent by police from an unknown phone. We could prove harassment if we can track it down. Aaliyah felt a mixture of comfort and fear as she exited the law office. Although Grace Henderson was a capable ally, she was greatly troubled by the prospect of a damaged reputation and potential legal complications. Nevertheless, she found strength in the fact that she was not alone. In the days that followed, Aaliyah returned to her work at NASA as usual. She returned to her data analysis work, losing herself in the reassuring cadences of scientific investigation. But her gut nodded every time her email chimed or her phone buzzed. Would the courts or the cops arrive at any time? She got a surprise call late one night from an unidentified number. She nearly disregarded it, expecting more abuse or a false tip. However, her curiosity overcame her, and she responded. Hi there? With hesitation, she said. A quiet voice answered. Is Aaliyah Monroe here? Sure. Could you tell me who's calling? A moment's silence. Caroline Jennings is my name. I'm not sure how to put it, but I believe I may have some information you require. I've heard about your predicament, and I'm sorry, look. I'm just afraid. I'm not confident enough to call anyone else. Aaliyah felt her heart pound. Could you elaborate, Caroline? How were you made aware of me? I dated Officer Rollins once, she admitted, her voice trembling. He's been boasting about some major idea, but I don't want to give away too much over the phone. It has to do with instructing a certain woman. After figuring things out, I thought it might be you. Aaliyah's heartbeat accelerated. Was this the puzzle's missing component? She asked Caroline if she could have a face-to-face conversation with her. After some hesitation, Caroline consented to meet the next morning at a covert coffee shop on the outskirts of town. Aaliyah collapsed onto the couch as soon as the call was over. Her heart raced with nervous anticipation. She needed concrete proof if Officer Rollins was planning something more than a routine traffic check, or if he was purposefully framing her. Caroline Jennings may possess that proof. Aaliyah's mind was racing with ideas. After the meeting, when she received more specific information, she opted not to text Grace Henderson about this new development. Was this a trap? Or might Caroline Jennings be a possible witness? Answers or more questions would be revealed the following morning. Aaliyah had no idea that this covert encounter would set off a chain of events that would lead directly to the most sinister secrets of the Morganville Police Department. And the whole community would be on the verge of a shocking revelation when NASA finally paid attention. Aaliyah was sitting peacefully at a corner table at the little, dimly lit coffee shop on the outskirts of Morganville, with a cold cappuccino beside her. Her nerves were not much eased by the mellow jazz song playing above her or the murmur of low conversation. She kept looking at the door, anticipating Caroline Jennings' arrival. Was I wrong? Is it a setup of some sort? At 15 minutes past the time they had scheduled to meet, a small woman with mousy brown hair entered. She seemed very careful, wearing large sunglasses, and looked around the cafe before focusing on Aaliyah. She swallowed nervously and stepped forward. "Are you Aaliyah?" Caroline whispered the question. Aaliyah gave a nod. "I appreciate you coming." Caroline took off her sunglasses and snuggled into the chair. As if she was afraid of being followed, her gaze darted around the room. She was clearly nervous and pale. "Mark, I wasn't sure if I could pull this off. He is capable of retaliation." Leaning forward, Aaliyah was firm but kind. "I get it. He's plotting something, you said. I must know, please." Caroline's voice was shaking as she fidgeted with a napkin in her hands. The other day, he was venting about how he and Derek Lowe were assembling evidence against a conceited, overly intelligent black woman who claimed to be a NASA scientist. He insisted that no one would take her seriously and that they would see to it that she was disciplined for her behavior. He still texts me, or I hear stuff through mutual acquaintances, even though we broke up weeks ago. Anger and terror swirled in Aaliyah's chest, causing her stomach to tighten. Caroline's angry lip, they acknowledged that they had lied about me. If it came down to it, they were discussing fabricating evidence, though I'm not sure if they actually lied. Even though your automobile was never reported stolen in the first place. Mark boasted that he could alter the police database to make it appear as though it had been reported stolen several times. Aaliyah felt a horrible surge of dread. "Have you got evidence? Is there anything physical?" After a moment of hesitation, Caroline pulled out her phone. She pressed play on a recording. One of his calls was captured on tape. Although the audio isn't the best, you can hear Mark discussing burying her and making explicit reference to you. "Your name," he says. He refers to you as that NASA woman. Aaliyah's gaze expanded. "Could you please give me a copy of that recording?" Caroline gave a nod. "I am here for that reason. I'm sick of keeping quiet. If someone was wrecked because Mark chose to, I couldn't bear it." She stopped, emotion choking her voice. "Just exercise caution. If he discovers I came to you, he will be enraged." With tears welling up in the corners of her eyes at this unexpected act of generosity, Aaliyah thanked her warmly. She vowed to give her lawyer access to this evidence right away. After giving Aaliyah a quick grip on the hand, Caroline went out into the bright parking lot and looked over her shoulder. An hour later, Aaliyah was at Grace Henderson's office, playing the recording on her phone. Grace's look changed from one of curiosity to one of grim delight as she listened carefully. The lawyer remarked, "This is exactly what we need. If the police charge them, we can initiate a civil complaint for malicious prosecution, which could lead to criminal charges against them if they are actually fabricating evidence or intend to do so." The remainder of the day was a blur of phone calls and paperwork, all of which was done in anticipation of the impending court date. Unaware that she would eventually have to spend just as much time parsing legal jargon and transcripts, Aaliyah couldn't help but go back to all the late nights she had spent studying gravitational theory and quantum physics. She felt the weight of the summons in her pocketbook as she made her way home as dusk descended on Morganville. She glanced at her bookcase, which was piled high with NASA awards and journals about space exploration. It was unbelievable that anybody could question her identity or her accomplishments. But in just a few weeks, she would have to explain herself in front of a court and a group of skeptics. She looked up at the night sky through the window of her living room. Silent observers of the injustices taking place below, the stars gleamed. The Perseverance rover trudged through Martian soil somewhere up there, gathering information for the next major find. Whispering a firm promise to herself, she closed her eyes. She refused to let prejudice and ignorance dominate her life's purpose. Meanwhile, the countdown until August 2nd had started, and Aaliyah could only hope that when those courtroom doors eventually opened, the truth would win out. Grace Henderson invited Aaliyah to a last preparation session at the law firm 1 week before to the court date. Grace's legal partner, Kevin Branch, a seasoned defense lawyer renowned for his sharp cross-examinations, joined them. Kevin, with his short-cropped salt and pepper hair and his fixed gaze, exuded a sense of composed power. With files, notes, and legal briefs arranged on the wide table in the middle, the three took their seats in Grace's office. Grace distributed typed summaries of the defense plan. "We must first make sure the judge understands how ridiculous these charges are," she continued. "We have proof of insurance, registration documentation, and an affidavit from your car dealership attesting to the date of purchase. Kevin took over. We'll also use your professional reputation to demonstrate how unlikely and nonsensical it is for you to steal a car that you already own. A formal letter verifying your employment and status was sent by NASA's Human Resources Department. Any sane person would wonder why you would jeopardize your career over a charge of minor theft based only on that. With tense apprehension, Aaliyah nodded. What about Caroline's recording? Grace tapped her pen against an evidence folder. To add the audio recording to the evidence, we'll submit a motion. We will contend that it demonstrates the malevolent intent of at least one of the arresting officers, so directly undermining the prosecution's argument. That might be our best option if the judge permits it. Aaliyah sipped from a bottle of water, sometimes while she listened carefully. The strategy sounded solid, but she kept thinking about what-ifs. What if the judge and the officers had some sort of alliance? What if, on a technicality, the evidence was declared inadmissible? Kevin saw her nervousness and smiled comfortingly. Aaliyah, we've dealt with situations similar to this previously. Believe me, the prosecution's case will begin to fall apart as soon as they hear that recording and see NASA endorsing you. Making sure the case isn't quietly dismissed before the whole truth is revealed is our biggest challenge. While we demand accountability, we also want the charges to be withdrawn. They ended the meeting after over 2 hours of planning. Kevin shook hands firmly. We'll see you shortly in court. Try to remain composed in the meanwhile. Stress can make you come across as unsure or hurried, which can harm your testimony. Aaliyah was led by Grace to the reception area. Don't be alarmed by them, she said. We have the truth on our side. Keep in mind that you have a whole NASA career behind you. That's no little matter. That will be evident to the jury and judge. Aaliyah mustered a tiny grin, appreciating their steadfast assistance. She stopped in her automobile to take a deep breath as she left the legal company. Friends and co-workers who had learned about the upcoming court case bombarded her phone with texts. While some asked uncomfortable questions about the circulating claims, many gave support. As best she could, she replied that the truth will soon be revealed and that she was innocent. Aaliyah got a call from a strange number the night before the court appearance. When the caller identified himself as Dr. Benjamin Morrison, Deputy Director at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, her heart skipped a beat. He had given a keynote address on NASA's next-generation space telescopes at a departmental conference, the only other time she had met him. Dr. Morrison, she said, a little shaky in voice. This is unexpected. He answered politely but hurriedly. I was informed about your legal predicament, Miss Monroe. A number of our leadership team members have voiced their concerns. NASA is proud of its reputation and particularly appreciates bright minds like yours. We want to make sure you get all the help you need throughout this disaster. In wonder, Aaliyah listened. She had never anticipated such a direct involvement from NASA's top authorities. At first, she had merely asked HR for a basic letter of employment verification. I know you already have legal representation, Dr. Morrison added. The agency would like to stress that any official statements verifying your job, your position, or any awards you have received will be given as soon as possible. If necessary, we are also ready to send a NASA representative to the hearing. The corner of her eye was on the verge of shedding a tear of appreciation. She had hoped NASA would support her, but this was more than she could have ever dreamed. I am grateful, Dr. Morrison. I can't express how much I appreciate it. He gave a gentle laugh. Miss Monroe, we look out for our own. You can be confident that your supervisors and co-workers are on your side. Get in touch with my office personally if you require any extra assistance. I wish you luck tomorrow. The call was cut off. With a newfound sense of self-assurance, Aaliyah sat in her living room with her phone in her hand. The police department would have a hard time accusing her of being a liar or fake if NASA was prepared to go this far. She hardly slept that night as she practiced the hearing. She imagined the prosecution table, the judge's bench, and the row of seats behind her where people would be watching. Would Mark Rollins and Derek Lowe, the cops, arrive grinning and smug? Would the district attorney present an unfounded story? At 5:30 a.m., her alarm went off. Wearing a conservative black pantsuit that she had picked to represent professionalism in the courtroom, the morning light felt chilly against her skin. A short look at the news and a cup of coffee. Her case was not mentioned, but she anticipated local attention in the near future. She arrived early at the courthouse and met Kevin Branch and Grace Henderson in a tiny conference room next to the courtrooms. Grace had a stern look on her face. It has suddenly come to our attention that the prosecution will make up a story about how poor you are. They say it's a reason to steal. Aaliyah's jaw dropped. That's ridiculous. N'est pas un salarié. This is not a financial problem. Kevin gave a shrug. They will stop at nothing to persuade the judge that you have a motive for committing a crime. Do not be concerned. Your most recent bank statements are here. Nothing seems out of the ordinary. It's merely a desperate move. Time passed quickly. They were led into a medium-sized courtroom with big windows that let in bright sunlight at exactly 9 in the morning. Curious onlookers, some locals attracted by the rumors, others perhaps there for other cases, filled the wooden benches. From the bench, the Honorable Rebecca Alton, a stern-faced judge, presided. Aaliyah examined her face for any indication of prejudice. Judge Alton had a reputation for being straightforward and making rulings that were only based on the law. Richard Paxton, a junior assistant district attorney for the prosecution, stood up to speak to the court. He repeated the claims that Aaliyah was detained when the Morganville Police Department reported a stolen car that matched hers, and that more inquiry raised doubts about her car's ownership. He employed tactful legalese that hinted at criminality while avoiding the idea that the car was unquestionably stolen. Whispers of excitement filled the courtroom during the brief break. Everyone in the room was talking about the audio recording. Some shook their heads in shock, recognizing the voice of Mark Rollins. Others conjectured on what would happen if NASA went public in support of Aaliyah. It was not often that a federal agency intervened so forcefully in a small-town courtroom drama. Aaliyah was in the hallway with her lawyers. She said, "Do you think the judge will dismiss the case?" Her heart still racing. Grace calmly replied, "I can't guarantee it, but she might. Despite our compelling evidence, the judge can insist on a full trial to make sure all relevant factors are taken into account. Let's observe the outcome of this subsequent session." Judge Alton wasted no time in calling a new session of the court. Her stern eyes fell on Paxton as she cleared her throat. "Mr. Paxton, the defense's proof is very strong in my opinion. The audio that implies Officer Rollins intended to manufacture evidence is really concerning. Have you had a chance to go over it more thoroughly during the break?" Paxton was standing there, shuffle his papers. "Yes, Your Honor. We believe that the voice identification is unsubstantiated and that the recording's clarity is doubtful." Grace got up quickly. "Our witness is able to recognize that voice and attest to its legitimacy. For her own protection, Miss Caroline Jennings is not present today, but she is prepared to testify if needed in the future. Additionally, the defense might set up a forensic examination of the tape." With a solemn gaze, Judge Alton nodded. "A formal forensic examination of the recording's veracity will be accepted. Let's go forward for now." Paxton looked at Officers Lowe and Rollins seated in the rear and squared his shoulders. "Your Honor, the public is considering whether to move forward with these charges in light of recent events. We ask for a brief extension so that we can assess the evidence and speak with law enforcement further." Grace protested right away. "My client's reputation and mental health have already been severely damaged, Your Honor. We demand the prosecution's apologies and the immediate dismissal of Ms. Monroe, or at the very least, her freedom from any suspicion." There was silence in the room. Glancing from the prosecution to the defense, Judge Alton stroked her temple. "Usually, if the prosecution feels that more time is required, I would grant a continuance. But the evidence against Ms. Monroe is at best shaky, and at worst, the result of wrongdoing. We're done here, Mr. Paxton, unless you can provide credible, substantiated evidence of Ms. Monroe's misconduct." The only sound to break the silence was Paxton rummaging through his folder while perspiring. He sighed at last. "Right now, we don't have enough evidence." The judge's eyes grew stony. "I am then forced to drop the accusations against Ms. Monroe. In addition, I'm asking for an internal examination of how the Morganville Police Department, more especially Officers Derek Lowe and Mark Rollins, handled this inquiry. They will have to take the defense's points of contention into consideration." The courtroom was alive with conversation. Aaliyah experienced such a strong surge of relief that she nearly fell back in her chair. It wasn't finished yet, though, and Grace put a comforting hand on her shoulder. Judge Alton signaled silence with a raised hand. In addition, Ms. Monroe, you have a spotless record and are free to leave. You are within your rights, though, if you or your attorney plan to take legal action for misbehavior or defamation. The session was adjourned when she struck the gavel. Gratitude and adrenaline mixed in Aaliyah's bloodstream as she swallowed a lump in her throat. The consequences were still present even though the charges had been dropped. Aaliyah was approached by a tall man called Charles Wilcox, a NASA agent. As people started to file out, he held out his hand. Dr. Morrison offers his congratulations to Ms. Monroe. We're glad this was resolved so swiftly. Do not hesitate to contact us if you require any additional assistance. Suffice it to say, thank you. Aaliyah shook his hand. Everyone in the courtroom was moved by the NASA representative's attendance, which was a show of strength and unity. A group of reporters from nearby media sites surrounded Lowe and Rollins and barraged them with inquiries regarding the alleged misbehavior. Aaliyah barely managed to get glimpses. Nothing to say. We must go over the facts again. All of this is miscommunication. Officer Lowe looked angry, and Officer Rollins' face was flushed. Aaliyah was led away from the mayhem by Grace. She said that it would be better to let the media do its job. We'll discuss the next steps shortly. Perhaps we proceed with a civil lawsuit. Perhaps not. However, you have been cleared for the time being. The midday sun felt especially bright outside the courthouse, as though the entire world was celebrating the win. Some of Aaliyah's co-workers who had driven down from Goddard were among the tiny group of fans who silently cheered. One of them even carried a sign that said, "We believe in justice and science." The support made Aaliyah's eyes prickle with tears. A local reporter pushed a microphone at Aaliyah in the middle of the crowd. How does it feel to have your name cleared, Miss Monroe? Do you have any thoughts regarding the audio recording that implicates Officers Rollins and Lowe? Aaliyah gave Grace a quick look. The lawyer nodded, allowing her to speak if she so desired. I'm glad the truth came out, Aaliyah remarked, taking a deep breath. I work as a scientist. Evidence is what I believe in, and the facts prove that I was unfairly singled out. I'm hoping that this causes our community to truly change. Power abuse and discrimination are unacceptable here and anywhere. Aaliyah was led by Grace to her car as the reporter asked another question. For now, she had said enough. NASA's confirmation of Aaliyah's identification had been the final nail in the coffin, and she was now free. She felt as though she was floating on her way home. Her chest, which had been tense for days, started to relax. The local news bulletin about the day's events was the first thing she heard when she turned on the radio. NASA's role in protecting their star astronomer was highlighted by the anchor as she described the hearing. The phrase brought a smile to Aaliyah's face. But one thought kept coming back to me. Even though she was exonerated, would Officers Lowe and Rollins actually be held accountable? Was Morganville's structure morally sound enough to penalize misconduct among its own members? The dismissal quickly became known throughout Morganville and beyond. Within a day, conversations of racial profiling and corruption in the local police force erupted on social media. One of Aaliyah's co-workers at NASA posted a tweet that went viral. The harassment of a talented NASA scientist by Morganville police is a disgrace. For this reason, representation is important. A picture of Aaliyah grinning in front of a NASA rocket prototype was attached to the tweet. Spots of the audio tape that revealed Officer Rollins' malevolent intent were played during segments on the case that were shown by local television networks. Already under pressure to handle earlier accusations against the same police, the Morganville City Council was inundated with calls and letters calling for responsibility. Almost immediately, the Morganville Police Department began an internal inquiry. Even though some officials tried to minimize the severity at first, the public's outcry compelled them to respond seriously. Officer Derek Lowe was put on administrative leave while the situation was investigated further. When forensic experts verified that Officer Mark Rollins' voice was heard in the damaging tape, he was immediately suspended. Grace Henderson and Kevin Branch engaged in negotiations with the city's attorneys behind closed doors. They had more in mind than a peaceful conclusion. They demanded that the police agency acknowledge the misconduct and issue a formal apology. Aaliyah debated whether to file a full-fledged civil lawsuit. She made her choice, however, after listening to the accounts of innumerable Morganville residents who had been subjected to identical profiling and intimidation by the same officers. Instead of hush money and quiet, the community wanted accountability and closure. So she told Grace to go ahead. Aaliyah told her lawyer, "Let them see that this isn't just about me. It concerns all those who have experienced mistreatment." Reporters soon found further skeletons in the closets of Rollins and Lowe. Other locals spoke up, recounting instances of traffic stops that resulted in bogus allegations and intimidation. After a year-long legal battle in which Rollins ultimately prevailed, one man alleged that he had placed a little amount of marijuana in his glove box. Another woman told how Lowe had humiliated her during a regular traffic penalty in front of her kids. The department could no longer ignore the growing pressure. After openly supporting his officers, Chief Raymond Burns came under heavy fire for fostering a poisonous atmosphere. He released a statement denouncing Lowe and Rollins and announcing their indefinite unpaid suspension in a final attempt to save the department's image. In the meantime, Aaliyah's prosecution was dropped by the district attorney's office. Rather, they concentrated on possible accusations of conspiracy to file a false report and obstruction of justice against the cops. As more information came to light over the next few weeks, speculation about potential indictments increased. Aaliyah returned to her employment at NASA in the midst of these chaotic events, determined to restore some sort of normalcy. As she worked on an exoplanet detection project and ran fresh simulations of Martian soil composition, she found comfort in her study. With every new finding, she was reminded of the size of the universe and the fact that, despite their importance, her problems in Morganville were but a little part of it. However, the struggle for justice had not ended. Depositions were arranged, and legal debates were raging as the civil suit moved forward. Grace Henderson worked late into the night to build a thorough case that would reveal a larger pattern of systemic misconduct in addition to the personal grudges of a few policemen. Mark Rollins came across as apologetic yet evasive during the deposition period. During cross-examinations, he stumbled and repeatedly denied remembering or verifying certain details. However, he was tied down by the audio evidence and the sworn testimony of Caroline Jennings. Derek Lowe attempted to disassociate himself from Rollins by asserting that he was only adhering to protocol. However, social media posts and text conversations exposed a long-standing friendship between the two, along with racist comments against different members of the community. The public's attitude shifted more sharply against them with every new disclosure. To urge reform, citizens staged nonviolent demonstrations outside the police station. A coalition of local community leaders, including civil rights activists, business owners, and pastors, pushed the city council to enact more stringent supervision regulations for the department. Reporters, activists, and interested bystanders crowded Morganville's courtroom for the civil suit's last hearing. As Aaliyah entered with Grace and Kevin at her sides, cameras flashed, documenting her every move. With solemn faces, Lowe and Rollins sat at the defense table, their attorneys frantically going through piles of documents. This was the end of weeks of tension, worry, and outrage for Aaliyah. However, she noticed Caroline Jennings sitting quietly in the rear of the crowd as she looked about. She gave Aaliyah a nod of encouragement, a tacit reminder that there were still decent people in the world and that bravery might come from unexpected sources. Anticipation caused the tension in the air to crackle. Nobody knew if a settlement would be made or how the judge would decide. However, one thing was for sure. There was no avoiding the consequences for those who had committed and encouraged this heinous charade. The wheels of karma had already started to turn. For Aaliyah and the entire town of Morganville, the last civil hearing was a historic occasion. Evidence of racial profiling, fabricated police reports, and intimidation methods by officers Lowe and Rollins were meticulously presented over the course of 2 days. The gallery gasped when Caroline Jennings testified tearfully about her ex-boyfriend's manipulation and boasting. By sharing their personal stories, locals illuminated a troubling pattern of abuse that had been going unnoticed for years. The courtroom was quiet enough to hear the slight hum of the air conditioner when the Honorable Marcia Lockhart, the judge, finally handed down her decision. Judge Lockhart denounced the officer's conduct as a blatant betrayal of the public's confidence and incompatible with the values of justice. At her own request, she granted Aaliyah a sizable settlement, part of which was designated for a new STEM community scholarship program. Aaliyah remarked, her voice shaking with a mix of relief and determination, "It's not just about me." Regardless of their background, I want to make sure that gifted students in Morganville may pursue professions in science and technology without encountering the same kind of discrimination that I faced. The sound of the audience's cheers reverberated off the wood-paneled walls. With pride in her eyes, Grace Henderson squeezed Aaliyah's hand. With a satisfied tap on the settlement papers, Kevin Branch smiled. Not even some journalists, who usually kept their cool, were able to contain their smiles. The careers of officers Derek Lowe and Mark Rollins were essentially terminated when they were fired from the Morganville Police Department. Potential criminal charges were pending against both, and the legal process was still ongoing. Their quick and humiliating downfall was the ideal karmic storm that Aaliyah had secretly prayed for. A department-wide review was made possible by the resignation of Chief Raymond Burns due to public pressure. In the weeks that followed, reform in Morganville and the new scholarships made possible by the settlement were featured in local headlines. Members of the city council enacted stricter laws governing law enforcement supervision, such as those requiring body cams, independent review panels, and anti-bias training. Aaliyah experienced a wave of emotional tiredness along with a deep sense of relief at the end of the court battle. Re-energized, she threw her pent-up frustration into her study and returned to her NASA tasks. She immersed herself in the complexities of exoplanet identification methods, cosmic background radiation, and new data streams from the Mars Perseverance rover. Every new finding seemed to confirm the limitless potential of science and serve as a reminder that the vastness of the cosmos could never be fully eclipsed by narrow-minded prejudice. Regardless of the strength of the opponent, each of us has the ability to get our voice heard if Aaliyah's struggle for justice has inspired you. It requires bravery, tenacity, and the backing of a group of people who share a commitment to justice. In addition to clearing her personal name, Aaliyah's indomitable spirit and NASA's verification of her genuine identity helped uncover corruption and open the door for constructive change in Morganville. It's your turn to share the word now. Tell this tale to anyone who needs a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the truth can triumph. Wherever it appears, let's keep combating discrimination, injustice, and the misuse of authority. For more tales that celebrate bravery, hope, and the never-ending pursuit of equality, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel if this one touched you. Continue to aim high and remain resolute.
Disclaimer. This channel stands against all forms of intolerance, discrimination, racism, and violations of human rights. The stories shared here are original creations, developed to encourage reflection, understanding, and constructive dialogue. All content is produced with a commitment to respecting diversity and honoring human dignity.